The dog just wouldn't stop barking at that old fridge, like something inside it was alive. It started like any other cold, gray morning in Silver Pines, Minnesota. Snow covered everything like a silencing blanket, muffling sounds and freezing time in its tracks. But when Officer Ray Holloway stepped into the abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, he had no idea this would be the most disturbing call of his career. At first, it seemed routine, just another sweep in the ongoing search for Leah Myers, the 28-year-old woman who'd vanished without a trace 3 weeks earlier. Locals had their theories. She ran off with a man. She got in over her head with the wrong crowd, or she simply needed to escape. Small towns are full of stories, and most of them are just that, stories. But this one wasn't. The warehouse had been inspected before, once quickly. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no broken windows, just a dusty, abandoned storage space filled with broken furniture, forgotten crates, and trash that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But there was someone who wasn't quite done with it. That someone was Shadow, a 4-year-old black and tan German Shepherd K9. Shadow had been through it all: drug busts, missing persons, even a house fire. But what he did that day, it defied explanation. Ray had barely made it through the side door when Shadow broke formation. "Shadow, heel," he barked. But the dog ignored him completely, head down, tail stiff, nose in overdrive. Shadow darted through the room like a guided missile, sniffing boxes, corners, debris. Then he froze, his nose locked on a refrigerator, an old, sun-faded GE model from the 90s. It was unplugged, tilted slightly to the side, like someone had moved it, then changed their mind. Shadow let out one low growl, then exploded, scratching, pawing, barking at it like a mad dog. Ray walked over slowly. He'd seen this kind of behavior before, but it usually meant narcotics or cadaver scent, something serious. "Easy, boy," he muttered, his hand tightening around the leash. "What's in there?" The fridge didn't smell. That was the odd thing. No spoiled food, no rotting meat, no decay, just a strange, chemical coldness, like the air before a snowstorm. The warehouse didn't even have electricity. How could anything be frozen? Still, Shadow refused to let it go. He clawed and growled, his teeth bared. He didn't want food. He didn't want a toy. He wanted that door open. Ray felt his stomach twist. What would you do if your dog kept telling you something was wrong and no one believed you? If you're the kind of person who believes in heroes with paws, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Real stories, real rescues, real heroes. You won't believe what some of these animals can do. Back at the station, Ray tried to report what happened, but the captain waved it off. "We've already cleared that site. Probably a dead raccoon in there or something. You're letting your dog's instincts get in your head." But something about it stuck with Ray. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was trained, disciplined, a machine when he had to be. But what Ray had seen back there wasn't instinct. It was desperation. That dog knew something. And the only way to find out was to go back. Later that night, Ray loaded Shadow into the truck and drove out to the warehouse again. Off the books. No backup, no authorization, just the dog and a gut feeling that refused to go away. They reached the warehouse just after 8 p.m. The wind howled across the snow drifts, rattling metal siding and moaning through the rafters, like the place itself wanted to speak. Inside, everything was as he left it. Shadow didn't hesitate, straight back to the fridge, barking, scratching. Ray walked up and examined it more closely. The rubber seal was grimy but intact. The handle had rust on it. There was duct tape along the top seam, like someone had tried to seal it shut. That made his blood run cold. He pulled out his multi-tool and sliced the tape. Then he grabbed the handle. It stuck at first, then gave way with a horrible sucking sound, like peeling back a bandage from a festering wound. A wave of cold air hit his face. Then the smell, not rotten, not death, something colder, faintly metallic, industrial. Inside, wrapped in plastic and partially frozen, was something pale. Ray staggered back. Shadow stood his ground. He reached for his radio with trembling fingers. "This is Officer Holloway. I need forensics now." 10 minutes later, the warehouse was lit up with flashing red and blue. Crime scene tape went up. Cameras, suits, gloves, forensics. Shadow stood calmly now beside Ray, watching the professionals work. "You said you found her?" asked one of the techs. Ray nodded slowly. "Part of her?" The tech looked at him. "Part?" "Yeah," Ray whispered. "There's only an arm in there, a human arm." It was pale, swollen, frostbitten. The fingers were curled, the nails still painted. Forensics confirmed what Ray already knew. DNA would come later, but the tattoos matched. It was Leia, or at least part of her. That night, Ray sat in his truck with Shadow beside him, still processing what had happened. Who would go to such lengths to hide a body? Who would seal it in a freezer, in a warehouse, and just leave it there? And why hadn't anyone believed the dog the first time? He reached over and scratched Shadow behind the ears. "You found her," he said softly. "You did what we couldn't." Shadow nuzzled his arm in response, tail thumping once. And for the first time in weeks, Ray felt something like justice start to stir. The real story was just beginning. Before she went missing, Leia Myers was just another small-town girl with big dreams and bad luck. Born and raised in Silver Pines, she'd spent most of her 28 years trying to get out, only to find herself pulled back in again and again. People in town said she was beautiful, bright, but always got involved with the wrong kind of people. Her smile was quick but rarely reached her eyes. She waitressed at Rosie's Diner just off Main Street and rented a one-bedroom apartment above the old bakery, which always smelled faintly like burnt sugar. Her life was ordinary on the surface, but beneath it, a mess no one really wanted to touch. Leia had a boyfriend, or rather had one, Jason Barlow, a former high school football star turned night shift janitor. He'd once had charm and ambition, but those wore out fast after a DUI and a failed attempt at starting a landscaping business. Now he was more of a shadow than a man, drifting between part-time jobs and long nights drinking at the Rusty Nail. Locals always wondered what a girl like Leia was doing with a guy like him. Some said it was love. Others said she felt trapped. But when she disappeared, everyone pointed fingers, and most of them landed squarely on Jason. "He was always hanging around her work," said one of her coworkers. "Jealous, possessive, like if she so much as smiled at a customer, he'd blow up." "She came in with bruises once," whispered another. "Said she fell down the stairs, but we all knew." The police had questioned him, of course. He claimed he hadn't seen her in days. "We broke up," he told them. She packed a bag and left. Said she was done. But there were no security camera recordings of her leaving town. No credit card activity. Her phone went dead the same night she vanished. And now, part of her body had been found in an abandoned freezer. Suddenly, everyone had a theory. The thing about small towns is that people talk loudly, freely, and often without facts. The day after the freezer discovery, the rumors began. "Did you hear it was just her arm? That's all they found. I bet Jason did it. That boy's been trouble since high school." Someone said she was involved in something darker, like drugs or trafficking. Maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to. The sheriff's department, overwhelmed and underfunded, couldn't keep up with the noise. Meanwhile, Officer Ray Holloway sat in his squad car, sipping cold coffee, staring out at the snow-covered streets. He'd been on the force for 14 years, seen plenty of things he wished he could unsee. But this case was sticking to his ribs like wet cement. Shadow, his canine partner, lay quietly in the back seat, occasionally raising his head whenever a pedestrian passed too close to the car. Ray kept going back over the same question. Why there? Why a warehouse with a sealed fridge in a place the killer knew might be searched? It was too risky, too exposed. Unless the killer wanted the body to be found eventually, or maybe they panicked and didn't have a better plan. Either way, someone had been sure no one would open that fridge until Shadow did. 3 days later, the lab confirmed the arm belonged to Leah Myers. The tattoo on her wrist, a small paper crane folded in black ink, was unmistakable. It had been done just months before she vanished. She got it after she started therapy, trying to take control of her life, a symbol of hope, of a new beginning. And now it had become a marker of a tragic end. Ray asked for permission to reopen the search, this time expanding the perimeter to include dumpsters, other storage units, nearby lakes. They needed the rest of her body. They needed answers. His request was granted, barely. The next morning, Shadow was restless. He kept pacing near the front door of the precinct, whining every time someone opened it. Ray thought about how the dog had reacted the first time, wild, agitated, certain something was behind that fridge. Could he do it again? Ray decided to test it. They revisited the warehouse. Nothing new. But as soon as Shadow exited the vehicle, he didn't go toward the freezer this time. He walked around the side of the building, sniffing the frozen ground, tail stiff again. 10 minutes later, he began digging. Just dirt and snow at first, then cloth, then bone, a femur wrapped in plastic, just like the arm. The scene exploded again with law enforcement and media. It became official. Leah's body had been dismembered and hidden in various locations around the warehouse grounds. 2 days later, more remains were found inside a rusted-out filing cabinet buried under a tarp. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became, and the more the evidence pointed toward one person, Jason Barlow. His prints were found on the fridge. Traces of Leah's blood were discovered in the back seat of his old pickup, which he had scrapped 2 weeks after her disappearance. And perhaps most telling of all, his alibi didn't hold up. When the detectives revisited his statements, they realized there were inconsistencies. He said he hadn't spoken to her since the breakup, but phone records showed a call placed from his cell to hers the night she vanished. It lasted just 36 seconds. Neighbors remembered hearing yelling that night. One even said she saw Leah leave Jason's apartment just after midnight. She looked scared. The woman said she kept looking over her shoulder, but no one called it in. Not then, not until it was too late. Ray sat with Shadow in his living room that evening, the TV quietly playing news coverage of the discovery. The town was in shock. A candlelight vigil had been organized in Leah's name. Her mother, pale and shaking, had spoken briefly to the press. She was trying to get her life together. She was finally walking away from him. Ray turned off the TV. He looked at Shadow, who rested peacefully at his feet. "You did it, boy," he said, voice low. "You brought her home." And for a moment, just a moment, the crushing weight of it all lifted. But deep down, Ray knew this wasn't over yet. Jason hadn't been arrested. Not yet. They needed one more piece of evidence, one last link, and it had to be solid, because without it, a monster might walk free. Officer Ray Holloway had always been a by-the-book kind of guy. 15 years on the force, he'd never once been written up, not for a missed protocol, not for a temper, not even a speeding ticket off duty. He took pride in that. Because in a town like Silver Pines, where everyone knew your parents and what car you drove, your reputation was all you had. But ever since Shadow clawed open that freezer, something inside Ray had shifted. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat without the metallic taste of guilt creeping in. Leah Myers wasn't just another case. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, a person with plans and memories and a voice that had been silenced in the most brutal way. And now the man who everyone believed had done it, Jason Barlow, was still walking free. Ray knew the pressure was mounting. The sheriff's office was caught in a balancing act, not enough evidence for a clean arrest, but enough to keep public suspicion boiling. That meant watch, wait, don't screw this up. But waiting didn't sit right with Ray. Not when he knew how much worse it could get. Not when someone like Jason had already fooled the system once. So he decided to bend the rules, just a little. He didn't tell anyone he was heading back to the Barlow property, and he sure didn't mention he was bringing Shadow with him. The Barlow house sat on the edge of town like a bruise, an old ranch-style home with peeling siding, a cracked driveway, and a chain-link fence that had lost its fight with the wind years ago. Jason lived there alone since his mother passed. Rumor had it he hadn't paid a water bill in months and used a neighbor's hose after dark. Ray pulled up in an unmarked cruiser and killed the engine. He glanced at Shadow in the back seat. "You ready?" The dog's ears perked up. No hesitation. He was already shifting toward the door. Ray stepped out into the brittle morning air. There was frost on the grass and a smell of wet leaves in the air, the kind of cold that cut through bone. He didn't knock. Instead, he walked the perimeter, keeping to the edge of the overgrown yard. Shadow followed, nose to the ground. That's when it happened. Halfway down the side yard, Shadow froze. Not a dramatic bark like at the warehouse, just a sudden, rigid stillness. Then a low growl. He moved forward slowly toward a pile of tarp and debris stacked beside an old outbuilding. Ray stepped closer. There it was again, that same smell from the freezer, faint, cold, synthetic, like old bleach and mildew. He bent down, peeling back the tarp. Underneath was an old duffel bag. Shadow sniffed and let out a short bark. Ray reached for the zipper and paused. This was so far outside protocol he'd be lucky if he didn't get suspended. But his gut, his whole being, told him this mattered. He unzipped the bag. Inside, a pair of women's boots caked in dry mud, a cracked cell phone, a small velvet box with a silver crane necklace inside. Ray stared at it for a long moment. It was the same necklace Leia wore in her last Instagram photo, just 2 weeks before she vanished. He didn't take the bag. That would be illegal. But he took photos, every angle, every item. Then he zipped it shut and covered it again. He called it in anonymously through a burner phone he'd used for off-the-record work. Gave coordinates, gave just enough for them to find it without tipping his hand. Then he got out of there. Back at the station, the tone had shifted. Jason was officially being treated as a person of interest now, not just a concerned ex. The items found near his home, now logged as part of the investigation, matched Leia's personal effects. It was all adding up, but there still wasn't a smoking gun. That's when Ray remembered something odd from his first search. The fridge. The duct tape on the seal. Who tapes shut a fridge? Even in an abandoned building, it felt rushed, like someone panicked. And then it clicked. Jason had once worked for the warehouse's maintenance crew years ago, before his downward spiral. Ray pulled the employment records. There it was, Jason Barlow, part-time janitor, worked there for 9 months before quitting after an altercation with a supervisor. Suddenly, it wasn't just a random location for a body. It was familiar ground. Ray couldn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, a cup of black coffee steaming beside a stack of photos. Leia's face stared back at him from an ID badge. Her last Facebook post, a close-up of the tattoo on her wrist. Shadow lay under the table, breathing slow and steady. Ray's phone buzzed. A text from forensic tech Julia Tran. "Ray, we lifted partial prints off the necklace box. One match. Jason Barlow." He blinked hard. Let the words sink in. But something still didn't feel finished. The necklace box was damning. But why leave it? If Jason had tried so hard to hide Leia's body, why leave one of the most personal items she owned in his backyard under a tarp? Unless he wasn't planning to bury it. He was planning to move it. That meant Jason knew the walls were closing in, and he might be getting ready to destroy evidence. The next day, they watched him. Unmarked cars parked half a block away. Officers posed as utility workers. Ray and Shadow sat in a parked SUV, tension buzzing in the air. Hours passed. At 5:47 p.m., Jason stepped outside. He was dragging a blue trash bin, heading toward his truck. Ray keyed the mic. "He's loading something. Stand by." But before backup could roll in, Jason popped the tailgate and tossed the bin inside. Then he spotted the utility crew. His eyes locked on one of them, and he ran. The chase lasted 6 minutes. Jason tore through backyards, hopped a fence, and tripped over a fallen tree root. He landed hard. When the officers caught up, he was bleeding from his arm and screaming, "I didn't kill her. I didn't mean to. It just happened." They read him his rights as Ray arrived, Shadow at his side. Jason looked up, wild-eyed, sweat mixing with dirt on his face. "It was an accident," he said, voice cracking. "She was going to leave. I just wanted her to talk, but she wouldn't stop screaming. I didn't mean." He broke off into sobs. Ray stared at him, expression unreadable. Then down at Shadow. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just sat still, gaze locked on Jason like he understood exactly who he was looking at. Back at the station, the confession was recorded. Clean, admissible. Jason had tried to keep her from leaving. Things escalated. He claimed he shoved her too hard. She fell, hit her head. Panicked, he dismembered her body, hid the pieces, told himself he'd figure out the rest later. He never did. Ray filed his report. The chief commended him, but no one ever found out about the off-record search. That part Ray kept to himself. Some rules, he decided, were worth breaking, especially when a girl's life ended in silence, and a dog, just a dog, refused to let the truth stay buried. The news hit Silver Pines like a freight train. Jason Barlow had confessed. Not to murder, at least not in the way everyone wanted. He called it an accident. A moment of rage. But for most people in town, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Leah Myers hadn't run away. She hadn't joined some secret life in the city or ghosted her friends. She had died here, alone, in fear, and she'd been buried in pieces by the man who claimed to love her. Within hours of the announcement, candles began to appear outside Rosie's diner, where Leah used to work. By nightfall, the sidewalk glowed with dozens of them, melted wax pooling in puddles, paper coffee cups converted into makeshift memorials. People left flowers, notes, even a folded paper crane or two. The town was grieving, and they were angry. Ray Holloway stood across the street, hands stuffed into the pockets of his parka, Shadow sitting at his side. He watched as Leah's coworkers came outside to place candles beneath her framed photo, taped to the window like a shrine. "She always made the best coffee," one of them said quietly. "Even when she was going through hell," another girl whispered. "She used to talk about moving to Asheville. Said she wanted to paint in the mountains." Ray didn't speak. He didn't need to. Shadow let out a soft whine and nudged his leg. This wasn't closure. Not really. It was just what people told themselves so they could go on living. The town hall held a special community meeting the next day. Rows of metal folding chairs filled the high school gym. The mayor spoke. So did the sheriff. There was talk of revisiting domestic violence resources, creating a hotline, even starting a community safe house. But behind all the well-meaning words, the unspoken truth hung in the air. No one saw this coming, and everyone should have. After the meeting, Ray found himself cornered by a woman in her 60s with deep worry lines etched into her face. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, gripping his hand. "For listening to that dog. A lot of people wouldn't have. Ray gave a tired smile. Shadow's the one who knew. He's a good boy, she nodded. Maybe better than some of us. In the days that followed, the district attorney's office began prepping for trial. While Jason's confession might hold up, it still lacked key evidence tying him directly to Leia's death rather than just the disposal of her body. Jason's lawyer was already hinting at a plea deal, second-degree manslaughter, 5 to 7 years with time served. It made Ray sick. He didn't say it out loud, but it sat in his chest like a stone. You can cut up a woman and put her in a freezer and still call it an accident. Then something unexpected happened. Julia Tran from the crime lab reached out. She'd been going through Leia's recovered phone, the one Ray found in the duffel near Jason's backyard. The battery was dead and water damaged, but the SD card was intact, and what she found changed everything. There was a video, unsent, unshared, saved in her drafts folder, timestamped the night she went missing. In it, Leia sat in her tiny apartment, eyes swollen, hair pulled back. She wore a gray hoodie and no makeup. Her voice was low but clear. If anything happens to me, it's Jason. I know I sound paranoid, but I've seen the way he looks at me. He gets so angry when I don't text him back right away. He's been showing up outside my job again, even after I told him to stop. He broke my door last week. I didn't call the cops because I was scared it would just make it worse. But if you're watching this, please don't let him tell people I ran away. I'm not running anymore. I'm done being scared of him. She looked directly at the camera. Then the video cut out. Ray watched it 3 times in his office. The third time, he realized his hands were shaking. It wasn't just a video. It was a testimony. It was Leia's last word, and it was everything they needed. With the evidence in hand, the DA filed new charges: second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, improper disposal of a body. The plea deal vanished. Jason was denied bail. And for the first time, it felt like justice might actually arrive. Slow, yes, but real. In the weeks that followed, Leia's story became something more than a tragedy. Her voice echoed beyond Silver Pines. A few local papers picked it up, then a Minneapolis outlet. Soon, a domestic violence nonprofit reached out, asking to share her video with the family's consent as part of an awareness campaign. Ray went to see Leia's mother, Mara, who now lived with her sister 2 towns over. She greeted him with tired eyes and trembling hands. "She recorded that for me, didn't she?" she asked quietly. Ray nodded. "I think she recorded it for everyone." Mara took a long breath, holding back tears. "She wanted to be brave," she whispered. Even when no one believed her, Ray sat with her for an hour, just listening, letting her talk. Before he left, Mara hugged him tight and sudden. "Thank you for not giving up on her," she said. Ray swallowed hard. "We didn't. Shadow didn't." That night, Ray pulled into the driveway of his small 2-bedroom house. He let Shadow out, and they walked to the porch together. Inside, he poured a splash of bourbon, not out of celebration, but in memory. He toasted quietly toward the photo of Shadow on the wall, the one from when they graduated K-9 training. "You did good, partner." Shadow curled up near the heater and gave a soft huff of contentment. A week later, Rosie's Diner reopened after a short closure. On the wall near the register, the owner hung a framed note, "In loving memory of Leia Myers. A fighter, a friend, a voice that won't be silenced." Below it was a QR code linking to the domestic violence hotline. Ray stopped in for a coffee and saw 2 teenagers reading the plaque. One of them looked up at him. "Hey," the boy said. "You're the cop with the dog, right?" Ray nodded. "My mom said your dog found her." "That's crazy." Ray smiled faintly. "Not crazy, just smart." The kid gave him a thumbs up and went back to eating pancakes. As spring edged in, melting snowbanks and coaxing green back into the trees, Ray and Shadow got back to routine: patrols, park checks, school visits, the normal stuff. But something in Ray had changed. He carried Leia's story with him now, quietly, respectfully, not as a badge of honor, but as a reminder of what people endure, of what goes unseen, and of what can happen when one voice, one girl, one dog, one cop decides not to let evil stay hidden. For a while, it seemed like Leia Myers would finally be able to rest in peace. Jason Barlow was behind bars, charged with second-degree murder. The town of Silver Pines had gone through its cycle of grief, guilt, and recovery. The diner reopened. The candlelight vigils faded. Kids went back to school. People learned to smile again. But in Ray Holloway's gut, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just about Leia. It was about Jason. Because Ray had seen a lot of criminals in his time, but the kind of rage, planning, and cold-blooded disposal involved in this case didn't line up with the story Jason told. "I just pushed her," he'd said during interrogation. "She hit her head. I panicked." But pushing someone doesn't explain dismembering their body, storing it in multiple containers, sealing it in a freezer like you're filing away a secret. That kind of response comes from someone who's done it, or something close to it, before. So Ray started digging. He requested files from neighboring counties, sifted through missing persons reports, focused on young women, particularly those with connections to Jason, ex-girlfriends, co-workers, even neighbors. At first, it was slow. A few leads turned into dead ends. But then he found her. Savannah Clean, disappeared from nearby Fair Grove 3 years earlier. 24 years old, worked part-time at a gas station, lived alone. Her case had gone cold after a couple of months, but Ray found something buried in the original report. Savannah had filed a restraining order 6 months before her disappearance against Jason Barlow. It hit him like a sucker punch. Ray immediately contacted Fair Grove PD and got in touch with the officer who'd handled Savannah's case, a woman named Detective Carla Moore. Tough, sharp, didn't forget faces. "I always thought Jason had something to do with it," she told him over the phone. "But we couldn't prove a thing. She vanished. No note, no body. And Jason had just moved back to Silver Pines." Ray told her everything about Leia, the freezer, the confession, the video. There was silence on the line. "Jesus," Moore said finally. "You think there's a connection?" Ray didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. They reopened Savannah's file, cross-referencing cell tower data from the week she went missing. They found something strange. Jason's phone had pinged off a tower in Fair Grove 48 hours after Savannah's last known contact. He'd told investigators he was in Silver Pines the entire time, but data doesn't lie. Ray sat staring at the screen in disbelief. How many other lies had Jason told? How many others hadn't lived to speak? And then, like a twist in a movie, came a voicemail from an unknown number. A woman's voice, shaky but clear. I think you've been looking for me. My name is Savannah Clean. I'm alive, and I want to tell my story." Ray nearly dropped his phone. Savannah had been living under a different name in southern Illinois, working at a motel, barely getting by. She'd seen the news about Leia's case online and recognized Jason's mug shot immediately. "That's him," she told Ray over the phone. "That's the man who tried to kill me." She came forward publicly a week later, gave a full recorded statement. Back then, she and Jason had been in a short, volatile relationship. After she tried to break things off, he started stalking her, broke into her apartment once, slashed her tires, left threatening notes. She reported it, filed the restraining order, but the fear didn't go away. Then one night, he showed up at her place. "I thought he was going to kill me," she said. He was screaming. He had a knife. She managed to escape through a back door and ran to a friend's house. But she never filed a follow-up report because the next day, she packed her car and disappeared. "I didn't trust the police to protect me," she admitted. "I thought it was safer to become someone else." She'd lived under the radar ever since. Ray flew out to meet her. She was different than he imagined, older now, with tired eyes and a weary smile. But brave. So brave. They sat in a Waffle House booth off the highway, steaming mugs of coffee between them. "You saved a lot of women by coming forward," Ray said. Savannah shook her head. "I didn't save anyone. Leia's the one who had courage. She stayed. She fought. I just ran." Ray leaned forward. "You're here now. That counts." Her testimony was exactly what the prosecution needed. It established a pattern, a history of violence, stalking, threats, attempted assault. Jason's lawyer tried to argue it was irrelevant, different town, different time, but the judge allowed it. And suddenly, Jason's accident defense didn't hold water anymore. He wasn't just a man who panicked. He was a predator. Back in Silver Pines, the town reacted to the news like a dam breaking. People were furious. How many times had Jason been reported? How many signs had they ignored? "How did we not see this coming?" they asked at city council meetings. "How can we do better?" The sheriff's office started mandatory domestic violence training for all officers. Ray was invited to speak at a community safety event, along with a representative from the nonprofit that had shared Leia's video. Standing on a makeshift stage in front of 100 folding chairs, Ray kept it simple: "We failed Leia when she was alive, but we can't fail the next woman who asks for help." The courtroom was packed the day of Jason's trial. Mara Myers sat in the front row, wearing Leia's favorite scarf, a pale blue one with tiny birds stitched along the edges. Savannah took the stand with trembling hands but a firm voice. Ray and Shadow watched from the back, silent observers to justice unfolding. Jason didn't look at anyone, didn't speak. When the guilty verdict was read, there was no reaction. But outside, as people gathered in the courthouse courtyard, you could feel it, not celebration, but release, like the town had been holding its breath for months and finally let go. Later that evening, Ray walked Shadow along the path that looped behind the lake. The air was crisp. Leaves rustled. The town lights glowed faintly in the distance. They reached the old bench near the water's edge and sat. Ray pulled out a folded photo from his jacket pocket, Leia smiling on her 27th birthday, holding a sparkler, laughter frozen in time. "She mattered," he said quietly. Shadow leaned his head on Ray's knee. "I think we did right by her." Just then, a car slowed on the nearby road. A woman leaned out the window. "Hey, is that Shadow?" she called. Ray smiled. "Sure is. My kids talk about him all the time. Say he's the hero dog." Ray chuckled. "He is." The car drove off. Ray stood, tucking the photo back into his coat. As he and Shadow walked home under the stars, one thought stuck in his mind: justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in small pieces: one voice, one survivor, one dog scratching at a door no one else noticed. Spring came late to Silver Pines that year. The snow stuck around longer than usual, clinging to rooftops and ditches, like the town wasn't quite ready to let go of the cold. But eventually, it melted. The ice loosened its grip. Tulips sprouted outside City Hall, and the high school kids were spotted wearing shorts, even if the wind still bit at their legs. And with the thaw came something else: healing. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy, but it was real. The trial had ended, and Jason Barlow had been sentenced to 28 years without parole. Not the maximum, but enough. Enough for a town like Silver Pines to take a deep breath again. In the weeks that followed, there were changes. The sheriff's department received state funding to expand its victim advocacy program. A small office was opened inside City Hall, staffed with 2 part-time counselors. Rosie's Diner set up a tip jar where proceeds went to a domestic violence shelter in Minneapolis. And in the center of town, near the library, something new was installed, a bronze bench and statue, funded by community donations. On the plaque were the words, "For those who speak up, for those who are heard, and for those brave enough to listen." Next to the bench sat a life-sized sculpture of a German shepherd, alert and loyal. The town named it simply, Shadow. Ray Holloway stood in front of it on the day of the unveiling, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, trying not to let his throat close up. Shadow, the real one, sat quietly at his side, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was still on duty. There were kids from the elementary school, local news crews, and people Ray hadn't seen in years. Even Savannah Clean flew back in for it, standing beside Mara Myers, the 2 women now bonded by a grief and strength most people couldn't begin to understand. When the tarp was pulled off and the statue revealed, the crowd clapped, but no one cheered loudly. It was a quiet, respectful kind of applause, the kind that said, "We remember. We're sorry. We won't forget." Ray crouched down next to Shadow and whispered, "That's you, partner. That's you forever." Later that night, the 2 of them walked the loop trail around Silver Pines Lake. The air smelled like pine needles and wet dirt. Ducks waddled across the path. It was peaceful. Ray had spent most of his life solving problems for other people, break-ins, drunk drivers, domestic calls that never got better, just quieter. But this case, Leia's story, it had changed him. He'd never admit it in the locker room, but some nights he still dreamed about that freezer, about opening it, the smell, the weight of knowing, the look in Shadow's eyes that said, "There's more." And there had been more. So much more. Back at the house, Ray poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window, looking out over the dark yard. Shadow curled up on the rug like always, his breathing steady. The old dog was slowing down, a little more stiffness in the mornings, fewer tail wags, more naps, but still sharp, still watchful. Ray walked over, knelt beside him, and ran a hand down his fur. "You saved that girl, buddy," he said softly. "Don't think for a second I've forgotten." Shadow thumped his tail once. A few weeks later, Ray received an email. It was from a young woman named Erica in Iowa. She'd watched a short documentary someone made about the case, about Leia, Shadow, the trial. Erica had lived through something similar. She said she'd been walking toward the edge for months, believing no one would believe her. But seeing Leia's video and knowing the dog wouldn't let her be forgotten changed something. "I called the police. I filed a report. I'm staying with my sister now. I think maybe your story saved my life." Ray stared at the screen for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Mara. Summer came. The kids got out of school. The fireflies returned, and Silver Pines settled into its usual rhythm, slow, steady, wrapped in quiet pride. Ray and Shadow visited the bench once a week, usually in the evenings when the air was soft and the sidewalks were nearly empty. Sometimes people would stop and say thank you. Sometimes they'd just nod. But every so often, someone would sit down beside the statue, say nothing at all, and just breathe. That was enough. On the anniversary of Leia's death, Rosie's Diner held a day of light fundraiser. People donated baked goods, painted crane symbols on the windows, and released white balloons at dusk. Ray didn't give a speech. He didn't have to. Instead, he stood near the back with Shadow, quietly watching as the sky filled with fading dots of hope. One of the kids from the school band leaned down and hugged Shadow. "Thanks for saving her," she whispered into his fur. The dog licked her cheek once, then sat up a little taller. There are stories that get written down. There are stories that make headlines, and then there are the ones that linger quietly in the hearts of the people who lived them, etched in places deeper than paper, whispered in the spaces between the day's noise. Leia's story was all three. She was the girl no one heard until it was almost too late. But in the end, she was heard, and it was a dog scratching at a dusty old freezer in an abandoned warehouse who made sure of it. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you. Thank you for listening, for caring, for believing that voices, no matter how quiet, how scared, how broken, deserve to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, we all have a bit of shadow in us, the part that refuses to give up, that won't let the truth stay buried, that sits quietly beside someone in their darkest hour and says, I see you. You matter. I won't leave. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone struggling and stayed silent? What would it take for you to speak up or be the one who listens? Because sometimes the smallest act of attention can save a life. And sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs.